Hey, what is up, everybody? Jeremy here. And guys, I'm very excited for the guest we have with us today on the Command Your Brand show. We have Ryan Staley with us today, and we're going to be talking about a lot of things around how to close big deals, how to scale your business, and, really why masterminds are the secret to figuring out what is missing in your growth strategy. So Ryan is the founder and CEO of Whale Boss. He is also the host of the Scale Up Show. Ryan, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, man.
Yeah, I'm pumped, man. I love what you're doing. Love the show. So excited to get into it.
So for people that are listening to this, if they're not familiar with you, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do at Whale Boss.
Sure, man. I'll give the super quick version of my superhero origin story.
Sounds great to me, man.
Like the 1 minute version. Yeah. So my entire career, like I kind of got hit over the head when I was at my first job because I was trying to understand what I wanted to do, and I was a busboy. One of my early jobs, got paid $375 plus tips.
Oof, that's rough.
I know this wasn't 100 years ago, right? So I saw, and this was what turned me on to sales, and this might be longer than a minute. If that's
cool,
okay.
Man.
But basically saw a sign that says I think it was like $14.95 an hour. So I went to check it out, and basically it was almost like an interview, but it was in a group format seminar, super creepy and weird. So I went in there as a little kid wearing my dad's like suit and his briefcase, and I was like, 14, and basically they pulled me aside and they're like, "Hey, you asked really good questions. We think you have what it takes, right, to be successful here." I'm like, "Oh, that's awesome. I must have done some good stuff." Well, come to find out, they wanted me to sell Cutco knives.
I was going to ask if that's what it was. It sounded like this was a Cutco story. I've heard enough of them.
Dude, totally, yeah. So anyways, fast forward, that like wet my beak for it. Spoiler alert, my parents did not let me take that job because all I was going to do is hit up their friends and try and sell them.
I will tell you, man,
but,
I've talked to a lot of, Cutco guys, and I think College Pro Painters is the other company that runs similarly. And man, they train some great people. Like they're really built well on training.
Well, yeah, I mean, so it's what I would call kind of like a character building job. You know what I mean? It's one of those. So I've done other jobs like that, but long story short, fast forward, had an entire career in sales and then sales leadership. Most recent was the VP of strategic accounts, which is basically VP of enterprise accounts. Grew that business unit from 0 to 30 million in annual recurring revenue with only 4 salespeople, no marketing, no PR, nothing, just basically core selling. And we also had another 30 million in capital revenue and did it all in like 5.5 years. So what I did is took the principles from that. Thank you, man. And I'm helping other companies grow and scale and apply those, and specifically work with tech founders on implementing those principles into their business so they could grow rapidly without having to invest massive amounts of money, give away equity, or hire a lot of people.
So I guess when you look at that, like, what are the key things to scaling like that? Because it's interesting. You mentioned only having 4 salespeople. So obviously, like, each one of those people has to be turning out really quality work in order for that to work. And you're not looking at marketing and PR and things like that. So, like, what things are you looking at to kind of scale a sales organization up like that?
Yeah, so there's a few things, right, that I saw that were consistent. And like one of the things I'm proudest of that my team did, and my team busted their butt, right, is that we got a $20 million deal from Amazon cold.
Wow.
Right? Amazon Whole Foods. Like, it just doesn't happen. And we were an unknown brand. So we could have used you back then. You would have been huge for us back then, right? So anyways, one of the key things, and I think most people walk right by this, and it's essentially, it's a strategy that Snowflake uses. Have you heard of Snowflake?
No, I'm not familiar.
They had like the largest IPO in software history of like $80 billion.
Wow.
Warren Buffett invested like 250 or 350 million, which he hasn't done in like 30 years, And so they're like a unicorn of unicorns in the software cloud market, right? And it was funny because I had to create a go-to-market strategy because they're like, "Well, Ryan, we want you to grow this business unit and get recurring revenue up." I'm like, "Oh, that's awesome. What's the playbook?" "Well, we don't have one. Go create it." "Okay, who's my team?" "Well, you don't have one. You got to go figure it out." I'm like, "Okay, well, what's our go-to-market?" "Well, we don't have one. You have to figure it out," right? And so really starting from scratch, like resource constrained, starting from scratch. And the one thing that we started with is the same thing that Snowflake does Whereas I don't even know if they were around back then, but essentially one of the things we do is most people talk about like ICP, the ideal customer profile of like who you want to target. Well, one of the things that we unlocked that was that basically with your ICP, that's a great starting point, but that's just a starting point. And so what'll happen is people look at their ICP, they'll do it once when they start the company or once annually or something along those lines. But if you apply what's called the Pareto, the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, and look at the top 20% of your 5 deals, and I call it the 5x5x5 method, right? The perfect customer profile is what are the 5 biggest deals that you close? What are the 5 fastest deals that you closed? And what are the 5 biggest losses that you had? And what you're going to start to see is patterns are going to emerge for that. And so what happens is you start to really target specifically, like hyper specific, the first 2 of like basically what are the fastest and what are the biggest. And what started to happen from that is that enabled us to really double our deal size every year over year. And so by the end of it, the first year to the last year, we 100x'd our largest deal size as a result of that. So that's something that I think is really, really actionable. That doesn't require people. It just requires intention and hyper-specific focus. So that's one example.
Let me ask you this then, because I think something that you can see in a lot of organizations as well is you're talking about, like, you take a look at your top 5 deals that you lost, your 5 biggest deals, whatever it may be. But I think you can also, there's some organizations that can look at that and they blame it on the wrong reasons, right? Like maybe, our leads aren't good, when it turns out your salesperson just isn't good, or whatever it may be. So like, I guess when you're looking at that, how do you decide like what are the right reasons, what are the wrong reasons when you're looking at, things that worked and things that didn't?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different factors you look at, but from a high level perspective, you look at the revenue range, the vertical, really the demographics would be in the demographics bucket. Then you look at really like the buyer components. So was it not just the buyer, like what their title was, but also then who are the 3, 4, 5 different influencers and what were their priorities? Like when I had you on my show, we were talking about relevancy for getting guests on your show, right? Same way, like what was their top priority at the time and why was the solution relevant for when they got the deal or when they decided to move forward? And the key thing that most people miss is they just kind of stop there, right? But what you'll see is there's usually 2 to 3 events that happen prior to make it a priority. And I'll give you an example. So we were trying to get into Walgreens, and Walgreens just merged with Boots. Boots Pharmacy, which is in the UK. I think Boots owns them now. I don't remember the exact structure. But one of the things the CEO communicated down to the street was that, hey, because of this merger or acquisition, we are going to save $500 million in the next 2 years, right? So what that did is that made taking costs out of the business a massive priority. And so when we communicated to them, we knew that was a trigger event that led to that becoming a priority. So it's really understanding the trigger events. It's also even down to the personality type of the people that you're working with. Like we found we had a sweet spot because we did a lot of customer entertaining and different like customer events of like, hey, we resonated really well with men between the ages of 40 to 55 that were heavy drinkers that like sporting events and, were married, but, and all these other variables, right? So that level of detail you get down to, and then you'll start to find ways to attract and interact with those types of people at the right trigger event with the right size company. And it'll also steer you away from, last but not least, companies that are too big. Because there's a lot of times where organizations are, not every big company is a good customer of yours, right? Or a good client of yours. And most organizations think the bigger, the better. Whereas sometimes the bigger means less margin, less chance to win, more headaches. So it's really
and that's a really, really good point too, by the way, because like, when you're selling to like large organizations, like if the decision has to go through 10 different people, it's too much of a pain in the butt to close the deal, right? Like, so it can be, like this person met with this person, but you need access to this person in order to get it done. But then at the same time, like when you're running a program with somebody, if it has to go through 5 different people running it, so that's a really, really great point. I don't think people consider that. They consider the prestige of working with a large brand, and sometimes it just may not be the right call for you as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was like, it was funny because we were working with Lowe's too. And it was like the same thing, it was a massive, massive contract, but because of all the pricing pressures from competition, it started to make it not worth it anymore. And so, it's like what you're talking about is the juice worth the squeeze, not just from a profit perspective, but from a hassle perspective.
So Ryan, one of the things I want to take a look at, because it's a really, really good point. You mentioned that CEO of Walgreens after the merger, they were looking at, saving $500 million annually. And so for them, like cost was a big thing. So you knew that going into the call. And I'm curious, when you're entering like a sales conversation like that, what does your prep look like to find something like that? Because that's a really key point, and a lot of salespeople are going to miss that. Because I know for us, one of the things that I've always taught salespeople is when you're taking a call, when you research somebody, you want to find something you can appreciate about that person and something you like about that person. Because if you don't, then you probably shouldn't be in a meeting with them. So I guess for you, when you're looking at it, like, how do you teach preparation around that to find those things like that? Because somebody may miss that before they take that meeting.
Yeah. So there's what I would say is you look at it. There's a lot of layers, but from a high level perspective, you look at it the macro factors of the vertical, right? So whatever vertical you're in or industry you're in, like for example, I work a lot with SaaS founders. So a trigger event, like for them wanting to be on my podcast, your podcast, other shows, is either they want to get funding or they just got funding and they want to tell the whole world about it, right? Like those are examples that are pretty obvious in like the SaaS space or the tech space. So some of them you'll find patterns automatically just by the vertical because, a lot of companies private companies aren't as specific about broadcasting the letter from the CEO and the annual report. There's 10K reports for publicly traded companies, all sorts of things. So there's ways where you could leverage that. But what I would say is like, a lot of times if you just Google and look at the company, are they growing? What season are they in, right? Are they merging? Are they acquiring? Are they spinning off? And that'll start to shape their priorities. But something you could even do when you're on the call, and this is, I know not exactly what you asked, but very specific, is understanding what their single biggest challenge is and what their single biggest priority is right now. And then you could lead into and get the details behind some of the areas with that.
Do you find that they're open enough with you to ask that in the call, or do you find that sometimes they're guarded at first, or what is that like in kind of getting into that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there's a little additional probing that needs to happen, but a lot of times if they're on a call with you or your team, it's for a reason. They want help, So it's just like, you could always pre-frame it up if you're having issues with that. It's just like, hey, I understand that one of the things that I always ask people when I talk to them, so I can make best use of your time, is what's the single biggest challenge that you're running into right now, and like if I can't align and help you, then I can connect you to someone else that would, right? So then that disarms them right from the get-go and basically opens them up of you being more of an advisor and then trying to sell them some shit, right?
Well, Ryan, I think one of the things that salespeople struggle with, especially when they're newer to sales, is like setting up a pipeline for themselves, right? Like understanding, okay, so like from the day one I talk to somebody to, day whatever it is that they close, like what does that look like? And you have to set up a lot of those cycles for yourself that you're setting up your future business. So when you're talking to salespeople about setting up their sales pipeline, like what things should they be looking at and what things should they be considering?
Yeah, so I look at this more from like a leadership perspective, because if you're talking to salespeople, a lot of times just straight salespeople, they're not at the stage in their career where they're going to think of it the same way as a leadership position would, right? They're sometimes it's hard to see the label when you're inside the jar is a good way to describe it. And so like I like if I had to break it down, and I was talking about this for it's like $100 million company earlier today, and basically three core areas that you should look at. And this is if you're a smaller business, if you get much more granular if you get bigger. But one is like, and this aligns with demand. Do you have enough consistent appointments, right, on a weekend and month out basis, right? So that's one. The other one are your stages in your sales cycle, right? What are the conversions? What's the speed you're going through the sales cycle? Is it 2 months? Is it 1 month? Is it 2 weeks? Right? And then also close rates. Like, what are you closing from start to finish? Is it 8%, 10%, 12%? And I think those are the key areas. And then what I would look at of how effective an integrity check on your solution is like, are those people renewing with you? What's the lifetime value? Are they expanding and are they referring you? So basically appointments, conversions on the sales process, and then at the same time, what are they buying from you after they bought from you once and referring?
And one thing you said that is really important too is when you're talking about lifetime value, I think something a lot of salespeople kind of stink at, frankly, is not continuing to stay in contact with that prospect after they become a customer and they go into whatever production area it is in your business, because a lot of times those rebuys and getting share of customer, whatever it may be, that's a lot of your future business, but a lot of salespeople totally miss that.
Oh yeah, I mean close rates like 60% on existing customers versus on average 12 to 15% on new customers, right? So that's how much easier it is. Deals close faster. If you look at, you probably haven't heard of them. Most people haven't. We have a company called Palantir.
Yeah, I'm not familiar.
They're multi-billion dollar and I think maybe $40 billion in value. And the cool thing that they do is they get, I think 60% of their business from their top 10 customers, right? However, because they focus actively on what I call the secondary sales process, what you just mentioned, where you have a sales process to acquire customers, and then you have a second sales process to expand them. And that second sales process, what they do is they've got it down so that every year, the customers that they have increase by 33% every year. So just imagine how that compounds, where they're spending 33% more every single year from your existing customers. It's just mind blowing.
And that's a place a lot of businesses are messing up because they're always looking at new public, which is important, right? You should always be talking to new people. But if you're forgetting about the people you already have, it becomes a lot harder than it should be. And those people are also going to send you more business if you're servicing them well.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Ryan, I know one of the things we got talking about here before we got started is actually a mastermind you're working on right now. So for people listening, why would they do a mastermind, and where can they find out more about yours?
Yeah, so I'm doing a CEO tech founder mastermind. It's really cool. Just started working on it, and it started to happen because like on my show, like we were talking about before. So I interview tech founders, and I noticed like a pattern where I started to interview all these people, and I'd batch my interviews. So I might do 4 or 5 in a day sometimes, which is a long day, but it's really cool because sometimes themes will emerge from the guests that I have, and you see consistency and patterns. And one of the things that I notice is I'm like, oh my God, this person's like so amazing at this, but they have weaknesses in this area. Like they're so amazing at product, but they have weaknesses on sales and marketing, right? And then this other person, I'm like, the person's amazing at sales and marketing. Boy, could they use help on product. and I started talking to all of them, and then like I realized like, okay, there's just really cool people that I had on my show, and B, like they all have like crazy good ninja skills that other people don't have. And I'm like, what happened if I like got them together in an environment where they could help each other and share and leverage their shared experiences? And I'm telling you, I just reached out to maybe 10 people. Out of those 10, 6, 7 people said, hell yeah, I'm definitely in. And we're off to the races in moving forward with that. So I'm in beta with that right now, but just judging by how people's responsiveness and how they're dropping everything else to do it, I'm like super excited about it because I'm a personal development nerd as well. And so like it's taken from the principles that basically Edison and Ford and Napoleon Hill writes about and Think and Go Rich. So absolutely love it. I've been involved in masterminds and it's been life-changing and transformative. So I'm like, why don't I start incorporating this with some of the people that I really enjoy working with and seeing and interviewing.
Very cool. Well, Ryan, I've really enjoyed this today, man. We're thinking big about sales. We're really looking at, reeling in those whales, which I think is really that big thing to getting that big recurring revenue. So for people listening, if they want to connect with you, if they want to, if they're interested in working with you or they want to check out your podcast, how's going to be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So my podcast is the Scale Up Show, and I drop 2 episodes a week. And I've been interviewing a ton of tech founders, and then I have tons of great sales content in there as well. And then if you want to connect to me, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's probably the simplest way. Just connect and write in the connection message, just like, hey, heard you on the podcast. Really would love to talk to you about X, Y, Z, and we'll take it from there.
Very cool. Ryan Staley, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, man.
Yeah, Jeremy was awesome, man. Appreciate being on.